right, ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment we have all been waiting for. I'm so excited to share with you this interview with Xavier Poussard, the journalist who initially broke the Brigitte Macron scandal via a publication. He did multiple series in it, collaborative work with Natasha Ray, who had helped him. You'll hear about that. So much is leading up to this moment, obviously. So I just wanted to let you know when I sat down with him at the end of last year, never in a million years could I have imagined that Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte would be sending me a legal letter. I believe because they knew that this interview was going to be forthcoming and they did not want this series to happen. And in many ways, this series may not have happened had it not been for me digging my feet further into the ground simply because I believe in free speech and I believe in information and I believe that what is happening in France is evil. Xavier Poussard has never before this moment appeared on camera. He has been remarkably private about his work. He has dedicated years of his life, has dealt with the brunt of what I would describe as a totalitarian government in France coming after him and his family. He has uprooted his family and had to move to Italy to make sure that they were safe and make sure that they were protected. And of course, he is not the only one. But this interview is a culmination of a year worth of work, really a year last year where I read just the tip of the iceberg and recognized that this was an explosive story. And then when Xavier Poussard and I initially sat down and we just showed a picture of him, YouTube moved to take the interview entirely off and essentially said that we weren't allowed to discuss cults or imply anything about cults, but we felt that they had perhaps been contacted by someone with a lot of power. Well, this time, what we've done as a response is we built an entire website where we can put interviews like this up without the fear of having them taken down. And of course, that's at CandaceOwens.com. So what we're going to do today is we're going to give you 15 minutes of that interview with Xavier Poussard here on YouTube, obviously making sure that nothing trips over any of their policies. And then the rest of the interview will be available for free at CandaceOwens.com so that you can watch it in its entirety. Just to let you guys know, when he and I were sitting down, I was still trying to comprehend elements of the story. So you may hear me ask questions as the viewers would ask questions, trying to understand exactly what it was that he was suggesting. That's why we felt that making this a series so that you guys could at least have the backing of the first 6 episodes to comprehend what he is saying, which I think most of you do now, was so important to us, so important to the team. We have put so much work into this, and I am just truly humble in all of this, grateful to Xavier Poussard, Natasha Ray, and all of the journalists who have braved the French government, really, and the evil of the French government to bring us to this moment. So without further ado, here is Xavier Poussard. Xavier, I really don't even know where to begin here. I already feel like this is going to be the biggest story of the year, and we're only in January. And so I think just for my audiences and everybody worldwide, just tell us how you got involved in the Brigitte Macron, Emmanuel Macron story, what your background is, and what piqued your interest.
Alors, je me suis intéressé à Brigitte Macron, tout simplement parce que je fais des portraits de presse.
So I got into this subject because I'm interested in press portraits, and that means I specialize in unauthorized press portraits, the sort of things that people might not want somebody to say about them. But I do so with a conscience, and I do so as accurately as possible.
And so they sort of dropped this biography, Brigitte Macron, Emmanuel Macron. There's this unofficial biography that gets dropped about them. And what is the first thing that strikes you as peculiar?
Ce qui était très étrange dans le cas d'Emmanuel Macron,
There was an over-mediatization. The mainstream media decided to very strongly attack the other candidates during the 2017 presidential election, particularly Penelope Fillon, and sort of hail and laud everything surrounding Emmanuel Macron and Brigitte. They were essentially attacking the far right, everyone apart from them. So they tried to paint this picture of Macron as being a sort of Mozart-esque figure, that he was very virtuous and precarious. They began forming a narrative that he had met this woman when he was 17 years old. So this man of great precarious nature, a conqueror, a virtuoso, who no one could resist, essentially, just as Mozart was. So the first lie was regarding age. A journalist had compiled a combination of the amount of times it was noted that they initially spun a narrative of him being 17 years old and her being 36. And so it was sort of this brave man, going after the woman he loved at a young age because he was just a daring young chap, so to say. Whereas, in fact, he was 14 at the time and she was 39. Which turns it from a brave story into a story of pedophilia and the abuse of a minor. When their real age was brought to light, there were many mechanisms of communication in the play from the couple. They really played on the way the story was brought to the public. It was sort of like Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman's movie Wag the Dog, where they used a spin doctor who brought certain messages to the public to distract them from the actual true scandal at hand. But there was a narrative spun of the difference in age being an issue between a man being younger and a woman being of an older age, whereas the difference of age was exactly the same between, for example, Donald Trump and Melania, yet no one batted an eye there. However, the issue is not so much the difference in age, and people sort of jumped on the bandwagon here and said, well, why? It's so unfair how a man with a more advanced age being with a younger woman is not an issue, but the reverse is quite scandalous. But that is not the issue here. It's an issue of the age of Macron at the time when he was 14. So this is clearly the abuse of a minor rather than just having a salacious story of a difference between the age of a man and a woman.
So essentially what you're saying is the media tried to do the modern feminist spin on this. Somebody got involved and said, we'll take the feminist angle, the sexist angle, the misogynist angle, the ageist angle, and say, you only notice this because it's an older woman. And why is that a problematic if it's okay for Donald Trump to be dating Melania? It's actually a very smart way to try to spin it. But you're going, no. This is not about the age gap between because it's a man or a woman. Emmanuel Macron was just 14 years old and she was 39.
D'ailleurs, ce que je t'ai expliqué...
Actually, Brigitte Macron was on the front page of The Economist, and there was this constant push on the left to guilt people that the idea of patriarchal society is not right. They tried to portray Brigitte Macron as this Barbie doll or pin-up to the public. I believe a firm noted that in 2018, there was more content on Brigitte Macron on the internet than there was on David Beckham, who's obviously far more renowned. And the internet became saturated with these curated pictures and often doctored pictures to make her seem appealing in a pinup and focusing on her attire, etc., rather than what was really going on. Insiders in power knew, but the media didn't focus on her increasing level of political importance, which was far greater than most first ladies had in the past. They saw there were no pictures of her as a child or as a mother. They saw there was no real background on her. And initially, it was well-meaning for journalists. They just wanted to build upon this narrative which had been created around her. She's this feminist icon. She's big in politics. Let's tell her story. But they failed every time. They always faced a brick wall in the end. And I would just like to give you two quotes from journalists who are not some conspiracy people. They're real journalists. The first is a woman named Virginie Lenhart. She's Ashkenazi Jewish and reports on the Holocaust and such topics on French television. She said, I needed photos of Brigitte Macron as a young woman with small children, showing an itinerary outside of those stamped by the Best Image agency. What doesn't come out is anything to do with her former life. It's a total blackout. The second journalist is Sylvie Baumel, who does portraits in the French edition of Vanity Fair. She said while conducting her investigation, it's like an episode of Black Mirror, where the president's offices have found a way to penetrate the brains of his former acquaintances and erase everything. So we are facing something completely incredible. All these journalists who are saying, let's tell the story of Brigitte Macron, they find this woman to be something almost paranormal.
Remind you guys about American financing because I know the average person finds it difficult to keep up with monthly expenses. In most cases, there is little left at the end of the month to cover any extras. Most Americans aren't getting a big raise, expenses are up, and it is very hard to manage without using credit cards. So if you're a homeowner and you're frustrated with that cycle, I need you to make a 10-minute no-obligation call today to my friends at American Financing. If you're carrying a credit card balance each month with a rate in the 20s or even the 30s, American Financing can show you how to put your hard-earned equity to work and get you out of debt. Their salary-based mortgage consultants are saving their customers an average of $800 a month. If you get started today, you may not even have to make next month's mortgage payment. There are no upfront fees, so it costs nothing to find out how much you could be saving every month. So call American Financing today at 800-795-1210. Again, that's 800-795-1210, or visit americanfinancing.net/Owens. That's americanfinancing.net/Owens. So these are not conspiracy journalists. These aren't people on Reddit that are trying to make noise. What you're saying is these people were well-intended. They were interested in this feminist angle. They thought this is going to be an amazing story to cover how this woman came to power, sort of like doing a profile piece on Michelle Obama during the Obama years. And they were sort of going, wait a minute, where is this person? How did this person come to be? I've never seen such a black hole. And this kind of gets into maybe something you never thought you were going to expect here as you were digging into this. You expected probably some holes in the story, but not, I guess, what you discovered next.
Alors parallèlement, moi je m'y intéresse parce que je fais des archives.
So what I do in my job is I archive things. This is what I really enjoy. I like going back into details and back into history and looking at people's problems. I had a bunch of people around me, my contacts in Paris, some mainstream journalists in the media who were egging me to say things. They said, go on, this is what you do. This is what I do. I take information and share it when other journalists cannot. And all of a sudden, I came across someone in my informal work surroundings, and he said, this is a man. Like, surely you can see this is a man. As if it was the most straightforward, obvious comment he could make about it. Another one of my colleagues, he's a civil servant, he calls her Amanda, which is a reference to Amanda Lear. There was a similar case. It's not well known in the United States, but Amanda Lear, she was a somewhat notorious figure. She was a muse to Salvador Dali. She was a singer and a television star. She's famous in France, so her biographies were written and rewritten, and every time they were rewritten, there were small discrepancies with dates and timelines. I got the same impression when I read Brigitte Macron's biographies. For example, the death of a sister in 1960, but we'd later learn it was 1961. Then the death of a niece the following year, but then when we would go dig for the information, we'd discover actually, in fact, she died in 1966. Then she says, I bought my house. We bought our house in the Le Touquet in 1950. We'd then go dig, it was actually 1957, and each time, like that, the story is modified, so in fact, we say to ourselves, what is this thing? There was this element of creating complexity and confusion in order to essentially hide the elephant in the room. Going back to Amanda Lear was born Alain Tappé. He is very well known today. In fact, she was unmasked because at one time in her life, she called herself Peggy from Oslo, and she was actually Mick Jagger's drug dealer. So we are still experiencing these very borderline behaviors. My point is, this avenue of a transsexual persona has been created before, but it's very dangerous to try to delve into it because you run the risk of being branded a madman. Who is this man claiming this absurdity? Is he crazy? So I was facing that risk. I started talking to my broader network. I started going to everyone I knew trying to figure out what was going on because I knew there was a story here and I wanted to deepen myself within the story. But the French, all in all, don't realize what's going on. It's not really on their radar. They're not quite aware as to how big this is. All of a sudden, I get a number from this girl called Natasha Ray. She's just a normal citizen, not a journalist. She claims to be able to prove Brigitte Macron is a man. So we begin to exchange ideas and work together for a month.
And is this the moment when you were first introduced to, I guess, the name, the person, Jean-Michel Trogneau? Because prior to, there were essentially just no pictures of Brigitte Macron for 30 plus years of his or her life. And was it Natasha that first brought forth the name to you, Jean-Michel Trogneau?
Alors, c'est quelque chose d'intéressant
So, this is something
puisque
interesting.
j'avais
I had identified this name in the archives of documents found in the commercial courts. I ordered a lot of documents from the commercial courts called the INPI to trace companies. I was interested in the Trogneaus, and I saw this name appear which did not appear in the biographies. I realized that Emmanuel Macron wasn't really selling well to the public as a persona. He was in managerial positions and in hedge funds, and the public wasn't really gripped by this. When they decided to create a presidential candidate, they tried to focus more on the background of Brigitte Macron's family, the Trogneau family, who are a family of chocolatiers from Amiens, France, since it is a family which is rooted in the real country, in the real economy. That is to say, they are not bankers at Rothschilds. They don't do mergers and acquisitions. They make chocolates. They were even compared to the Kennedys in the French press. At that moment, we said to ourselves, why is there this insistence on each brother, each sister, each niece, etc., except one, Jean-Michel Trogneau? Jean-Michel was erased, and Natasha told me that a family photo, which was supposed to have Brigitte on her mother's lap, had been shown to the press, and she told me, but look closely at the little boy. This is Jean-Michel Trogneau. By process of elimination, it is Jean-Michel Trogneau, and this hidden brother, if you look closely, is actually Brigitte Macron. She was fully convinced, and I thought, it's very disturbing. It's worth cross-checking.
So in America, there's an expression, um, we say the dog that doesn't bark, right? So what's quite interesting is this is the dog that's not barking. There's all of this information about all the family members, and you recognize that there's no information about this family member. And that photograph that we saw of their family in Amiens, I remember the first time that I saw that photo because that's actually what got me involved in the case. It was, for me, a matter of common sense. I just looked at the photo, and the Daily Mail was trying to tell me that the little girl on the lap was young Brigitte, and I just looked over to the left of the photo and I said, "No, I have 2 eyes." Obviously, I don't even know what the theory is, but that's clearly Brigitte, a very distinct face. You can't really change your face. Well, I guess you can, but, it was very distinct to me. So this is sort of, what Natasha noticed is you're looking at this family photo, you're looking into Amiens, you're looking into this chocolatiers, and you're noticing that this boy on the left, you don't know anything about whatsoever. S What happens next?
Alors, hem, moi, je me dis dans mon journal,
In an article, I stated that, this is a legitimate question. It's one worth posing. Why is Brigitte hiding parts of her past? And why is there such an unwillingness to speak about Jean-Michel? What really prompted me to pursue this question was when Natasha and I started speaking about this, they detained her on order of a cousin of Brigitte Macron. Natasha would develop an in-depth thesis on how Brigitte Macron is Jean-Michel Trogneau and who Brigitte's children actually belong to. We then realized further that one of the cousins was trying to set us up by giving us details which weren't quite accurate, essentially sending us down the wrong avenues. They tried manipulating Natasha, myself, since I relied on this thesis for information, and another reporter as well, into pursuing these false leads, perhaps on order from the Élysée and the government itself.
Okay, so that's fascinating because and this was also something that, again, I always tell my listeners, just common sense, right? So I'm just thinking, I'm the First Lady of France. I'm Candace. If somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, your brother doesn't exist or your sister doesn't exist," I'm going to take an opportunity to do a press conference. I'm going to stand next to my brother and I'm going to say, "Conspiracy theories are harmful. Let's put this to bed." I wouldn't contact the French equivalent to the Secret Service and have them detain a journalist that's working on a story. That instantly flags me as very odd. So you're saying in addition to this, they're also giving you misinformation, ironically,
mmh,
and trying to get you to arrive at the wrong conclusion. So you've got intimidation and you have misinformation, and all you're doing at this point is researching. You haven't even arrived at any conclusions, but that's probably making you feel like, what's going on here? Unfortunately, you guys, that is where we are going to have to cut the interview. As we said, the last time we spoke with Xavier Poussard, our interview got taken down from YouTube, and we want to play it safe. So all of you can head to CandaceOwens.com and watch the interview in its entirety, the rest of the interview for free. It's completely free of charge. The topic is way too important for us to put it behind a paywall. We hope that you appreciate the conversation, and I can't wait to speak with you guys about it on tomorrow's show. We'll see you then.